Technologies in Amity. Pursue industry-led BTech degrees in automobile, aeronautical and industrial heavy machinery. Apply at amity.edu/AIT.
This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV 24/7.
In association with BayTM.
Good evening, you're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Over the next 2 days, India's top diplomats will be dealing with one of their biggest foreign policy challenges. That is because the 48 members of the Elite Nuclear Suppliers Group, or the NSG, will begin their plenary in Seoul, where India hopes it will finally be admitted as a member. India got a historic waiver from the NSG in 2008 for civil nuclear commerce, despite not having been a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which India says is discriminatory. Then too, China was strongly opposed to any exceptions for India, but some heavy lifting by the White House pushed it through. Now, 8 years later, India faces Chinese opposition again, only this time the opposition has been more vocal. Can India cross the China hurdle at the NSG? Well, ahead of the NSG plenary in Seoul tomorrow, China, in fact, has not budged from its position that India's membership is not on the agenda, though they have made some more positive noises and said that 3 rounds of unofficial discussions have been held among NSG members on both India and Pakistan's membership. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said today that China will play a constructive role in the discussions, although parties are yet to see eye to eye on this issue. Such discussions help them better understand each other. She went on to say that the NSG plenary meeting in Seoul is only to deliberate on the entry of members who have signed the NPT. As for the entry of non-NPT countries, the group has never put that on its meeting agenda. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar has decided to skip a crucial multilateral summit in Tashkent and has gone to Seoul. MEA sources say there should be no speculation on what the outcome of the NSG meeting will be and that it is a delicate and complex process. Prime Minister Modi will meet the Chinese president in Tashkent tomorrow. Sources telling us, in fact, that all of this likely to go down to the wire. Well, joining us on the program tonight is India's former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shyam Saran, who in fact was one of the key negotiators in the India-US nuclear deal and one of the key players when India got that NSG waiver in 2008. At that time, Mr. Saran, you were in the thick of things in Vienna. I'm sure you feel for the diplomats today who've flown out to Seoul and have some pretty tough negotiating to do over the next couple of days.
Well, from what I can hear, that there is probably going to be almost as challenging an environment at the NSG meeting as there was in Vienna when we were trying to get the waiver. So I am very interested in seeing what it actually results in, whether India does manage to get the membership or not.
What is your reading of the situation at the moment, sir? Because we know that, of course, in 2008 and as well, the Chinese were strongly opposed to any exceptions being made for India. This time, their opposition seems to be far more public, far more vocal, and they've repeated it today, saying that it's not on the agenda. They've clubbed India and Pakistan together. They've said that, member countries still don't see eye to eye on this issue. And this is on the eve of the plenary. Would you say that this has made India's task very difficult?
Yes, there is no doubt about that, because on the earlier occasion, China had not taken a very public position in terms of its opposition to India getting the waiver. It was working mainly through some of the smaller countries who also had their reservations about India getting the waiver. But they never came out directly themselves in public opposing India's the waiver for India. So this time, the fact that they have taken a very public position makes it a little more difficult for them to step back from that position.
And therefore, why do you think that the Chinese are playing, so difficult with this? Is it because of Pakistan? Is it because they don't want to see India at a high table like the NSG? What's the real game here?
Well, the reasons are very similar to the reasons that were adduced also in Vienna by them, namely that this is something which may undermine the non-proliferation regime. Secondly, that this may upset the balance between India and Pakistan in the subcontinent. We should have a criteria-based approach rather than make an exception for a particular country. So the arguments are not very different from what they were before. But I think what is different this time, as you yourself pointed out, is that the Chinese have taken their opposition into the public domain. And that is why it is a little difficult for them to step back from it.
One of the things that worked in 2008 also was the fact that you had President Bush, who really strongly batted for India. He made a call to the Chinese president at the time, and that certainly helped push things along at that time. Even though this time the US also has given very strong words of support to India, isn't it a very different United States today and a very different Chinese leadership? Do you believe, what I'm asking is, do you believe that the US pressure could play a similar role like it did back then, or that these are two very different countries in very different circumstances today?
Well, as you pointed out, I mean, it is a different United States today, a different United States leader. There is a much more confident, much more assertive China than we had encountered in 2008. And also, I think the importance of Pakistan to China may have perhaps become somewhat more significant because of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, a long-term commitment that China has made to Pakistan. So there may be multiple reasons actually why China may be taking a much more tough stand than it has in the past. But I would also like to point out that one of the things which succeeded in 2008 was the fact that we were able to mobilize support from virtually all the countries, including those smaller ones who were opposed to begin with. When it became obvious to China that it would probably be the last man standing, in fact, they conveyed their approval for the draft waiver document a few hours before some of the other holdouts did. So from that, I gathered that China would not like, or at least at that stage, did not wish to be the one country which raised its hand and said, I do not want to join the consensus.
And that, in fact, we've also heard, from the Americans that there's no question of India and Pakistan being clubbed together, which is why to hear China repeat that almost every day has really been quite interesting, to say the least. Finally, sir, if you had to stick your neck out, and you said you shouldn't pin hopes and make Seoul sort of the only meeting and the end game of this, do you think that in a sense the government has made a mistake in staking so much on this plenary? Because I think they've been keen to do this before the Obama presidency winds down. But do you think that we set too ambitious a goal to get this done now?
Well, let me say that I don't think there is any harm in being ambitious. In 2008, not many people gave us the chance of actually getting the waiver through. So if we had not been ambitious, if we had not been pushing our case, maybe we would not have got the waiver through. So making that strong effort, I do not take objection to that. But I would hope, as I said, that we don't make the Seoul meeting the make or break meeting. I think that is very important. I think that perhaps this is something which will require a longer play on our part, and that is in the very nature of the kind of issue that we are dealing with. I don't think we should give up too easily, but at the same time, I don't think that we should make Seoul as if this is something that, if India is not able to get the waiver through, this is somehow a setback for India. I don't think that should be regarded as a setback. It should only be regarded as perhaps requiring another step in the future before we can get what we want.
Well, Ambassador Shyam Saran, always wonderful to talk to you, sir, and nobody knows how to deal with the NSG, I think, better than you do, given your experience in dealing with all these countries when India got that historic waiver in 2008. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, joining us on the program tonight, we have Vivek Karchu, former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. We have Dhruv Jaishankar, Fellow for Foreign Policy at Brookings, India. Also with us tonight from the BJP, Mr. GVL Narasimha Rao and Ajoy Kumar of the Congress Party. Mr. Karchu, let me ask you first. Ambassador Shyam Saran, whom we were just speaking to before this, was telling us he believes it's going to be a pretty tough journey for India, but that Seoul's meeting should not be seen as a make or break meeting. It may go beyond that, and that is not a diplomatic failure. Would you agree that that's a fair assessment?
Look, diplomacy is always a process. It should not be related to an event. However, in this particular case, unfortunately, over the past few weeks, this particular Seoul meeting has been given a kind of aura which I think was not merited. And therefore, while the objective of getting into the NSG is very valid and I think has to be pursued and pursued vigorously, I am a little worried if we are abandoning our traditional system of patient diplomacy, of incremental diplomacy, and going for broke in this case. We certainly never exposed the Prime Minister directly in the line of diplomatic fire. But in this case, it seems to be being done. It is as if the Prime Minister has taken over the reins of this diplomacy himself. And I wonder whether his advisors in this regard were wise. So I have many concerns at the moment because the Chinese have made their position quite apparent. But equally as of the Chinese, I am equally worried about the Turks, though no one is talking about the Turks, because the big difference between 2008 and now is the Pakistan card which has been played. And we've heard the Pakistanis say somewhat triumphantly that they've managed to block.
So
India's
you're saying that the stakes were raised too high.
One last word, Nidhi.
Yeah.
Nidhi, just one last word. The question is not whether we'll get in. I think at some stage we'll of course get in. But the question is if Pakistan wants to ensure through China and Turkey that both India and Pakistan get in simultaneously. Now that is the crucial issue. And if the Chinese have accepted this argument, so there are these imponderables at the moment, but diplomacy should never be reckless.
Okay, well, those are pretty strong words. Dhruv Jaishankar, let me take that to you. Mr. Karju saying diplomacy shouldn't be reckless. He's critical of the way that this was pitched as an, in a sense, all or nothing meeting. You, however, wrote, and you had an interesting set of tweets you put out this morning. You called it a short rant about India's bid for the NSG. And you said, you know, you want to address those people who question why India is investing so much in this and pushing so hard in this, even though it may not necessarily happen this time.
It may not. I don't think we should expect necessarily a firm decision, and perhaps not a decision that goes in India's favor in the next few days. It would be nice if that did happen. It may not. More likely, we'll see this going into overtime. We'll see this being pushed to another meeting, perhaps later this year, something like that. So I think we should keep our expectations low. If there's a positive outcome, that would be great. But I don't think this is an issue that could be resolved through incremental diplomacy. In fact, arguably the NSG India's admission to the NSG should not be a major issue. It should be, India has a strong record, it has made a strong application, it has the support of almost every country in the NSG. So this should be something that is relegated to the inside pages of a newspaper. The fact is, China's very public opposition has made this first-tier issue. So in fact, the fact that the Prime Minister has had to be involved in terms of lobbying countries, the fact that the US has had to play a role in lobbying on India's behalf with some countries is precisely because China is blocking this. So the argument I've made is this isn't a big issue. It need not be a big issue. But India needs to be fighting this fight precisely because it is facing opposition.
And therefore, it should be where you put in your best and you go all
Indeed.
out.
And in fact, if India can't do this at something such as the NSG, then India won't be able to do it at forums that matter much more. We would expect at some point India will face similar opposition from China at much more important multilateral fora.
That's an important point, and I want to also come to what you wrote about China and what the fallout of this could also be. But I want to ask Ajay Kumar of the Congress that Ambassador Shyam Saran, who was just speaking to us, had a good point to make. He said that it's good that India's diplomats, kind of what Dhruv Jaishankar is saying, is that it's good that India's diplomats are being ambitious and going all out and pushing this, because even in 2008, where he was the key negotiator, nobody gave India a chance or gave India, a much smaller chance. And every effort has to be made, and it shouldn't then therefore be seen in political terms as a failure or a success for the diplomats involved or for even the Prime Minister. Ajay Kumar, isn't that a fair argument? Your government went through NSG round 1. You've seen how difficult it can be.
You know, Nidhi, one thing, if you remember 2008, was there so much of drama, event management, and like my colleague on the channel correctly said, that Mr. Modi doesn't seem to need anybody, and that's why the Prime Minister is doing with the center of focus for this NSG issue. It's because the Prime Minister has made it such a brouhaha about of this whole stuff. 2008, you know, the Bharatiya Janata Party would never like to say it, but it was the first time when a non-NPT country got the waivers which the NSG as a group gave, and China was on board, and all other countries were on board. But today, what do we have? We have the Prime Minister going all over the world. It will give another opportunity, like Australia and New Zealand are still not on board, and Turkey, so probably will have the mandarins in the ministry asking him to go and visit and convince him. But the issue is, why did we put India, we have been hyphenated with Pakistan, why did we have to make so much of drama? It is, diplomacy is very important, we should be very strong on it. But is it an event management? And I think that's where India is becoming, you know, losing its stature. I totally support that we should go for it. But can't we do it in a less event management methodology? Switzerland has said yes. Mexico has said yes. I mean, this whole leakages by the government and everything else. And then now the foreign secretary rushing to Seoul. What does it show? And irrespective of whether you say if we don't get it, it definitely diminishes in terms of perception. And why do we have to make so much of a, can the foreign secretary be, going quietly? Can't we use our diplomatic prowess? And Prime Minister in the center, as if the ministry doesn't exist, the foreign ministry doesn't exist. But the most important thing is, what is this NSG membership?
Well,
it is important, I accept.
So
but in 2008, Nidhi, 2008, I'll finish off, Nidhi, I'll finish off with one point. Nidhi, I'll just finish off. In 2008, we got most of the waivers, the ability to transact nuclear trade with the other countries.
You're saying it is a perception battle. I understand
China
what you're
saying.
I take that to Mr. GVL Rao. Mr. Rao, what the Congress is saying, and I think what Mr. Vivek Karju was also saying earlier, is that India staked too much on this one meeting and hyped it up, and now you may deal with the perception issue if it doesn't happen right now, which may not necessarily be fair, but certainly the build-up and the hype around it has made it a little problematic. Mr. Rao, how would you respond to that?
No, I think the Congress party has been carping too much even on foreign policy issues, and I think sometimes you wonder whether they are actually speaking up for India and India's interests. I think I have to make this comment, a strong comment, because more often than not, you have seen a Congress party taking adversarial positions to India's interests. I think, having said that, I think it's not government, it's not the Prime Minister or the Foreign Affairs Ministry which is hyping it up. I think there is a lot of active diplomacy that's going on, and you have a very active media today which reports on issues like this. I think 8 years prior to this, 2008, the media was not as active as it is today. It has nothing to do with the governmental any efforts to promote.
We were live. It was active, sir. No, but was there a perception you think that the government gave out that this meeting, it hinges on this meeting? Because we've also seen reports, Mr. Rao, that have also come from officials that we want to do it before the Obama presidency is over. You know, this is why it's so important to push for this now. Was there, too much of a build-up that centered around this particular meeting?
No, but Nidhi, I think the results that you have seen over the past few days and over the past few weeks speak up for the efforts and their successes. I think you've seen wherever Prime Minister went, you had these countries dropping their opposition to India, becoming a full member. It's a very ambitious and a very difficult proposition. But it doesn't mean that India doesn't try hard enough. You have the support of countries which have not been forthcoming in their support in 2008. I think except China, you don't see any other country openly talking about it. So certainly I think we still have some time left. So there are efforts still being made, and you have the support of the major powers which want to have India included in NSG,
give me a moment.
so that civilian nuclear commerce can happen.
Yeah. Mr. Karchu, what is wrong with India's diplomats being ambitious and going all out on this? Is there anything wrong in that, even if it is as public as it is now? And certainly it's very hard in this day and age of, 3,000 million TV channels and 24-hour news to hide anything. So is there wrong with having this kind of aggressive diplomacy, out there?
Nidhi, I think ambition is perfectly fine. Diplomats must be ambitious, countries must be ambitious. But ambition has always got to be tempered with realism. That is one. Now let us see the sequence of why this went so public. The Prime Minister's last tour, 2 countries were targeted for NSG, that was Switzerland and Mexico. It is to the Prime Minister's credit that he brought them around. That is something which the Prime Minister can justifiably take pride in. But the problem is that it was in America that this matter got raised, and raised very seriously, with the Americans saying that they were not only supporting India's bid, but that they were becoming India's advocate too. Now, this time around, the situation is qualitatively different from 2008 because of the Pakistan factor. And with the Pakistan factor comes in the Islamic world. And my question is just this, that did our diplomats think that the Chinese would not take care of their South Asian diplomacy and the South Asian factor? Or did they think that the Americans would be able to prevail, do all the heavy lifting and prevail, just as they had done in 2008? Because all that then led to this event, this plenary being hyped. Why couldn't we take the position, for instance, that we put in an application, we think our application has got great support,
and
which is obvious, and that India has a very good case. In fact, the NSG without India is not full, and therefore we will take our, if we are patient and as
Ajay, one moment.
We'll be happy.
One moment, Dhruv, yes.
So I think it should be clear. I mean, India did not bring Pakistan into the equation, which it seems to be what Ambassador Karchu is implying. China brought Pakistan into the equation. And the fact is, India is India and Pakistan is Pakistan. The merits of India's case, and India has been building up a case, it's been aligning its export controls in line with the NSG, it has been lobbying, it has received the support from most of the countries again, is qualitatively different from Pakistan's. Pakistan doesn't really have a reasonable case. It hasn't received a waiver. It doesn't really have a reasonable case to be a member of the NSG. The reason Pakistan's even being brought up is because China is using this as an excuse to try and gum up the works for India's entry into the NSG.
Interestingly, you wrote about the possible fallout of this not happening in the near future, and you said, obviously, that China's opposition is political, but that it would severely set back relations with India. Is this something that the government should not have anticipated? It's the whole hyphenation that happened with Pakistan as well.
No, this would be one more card that China seems to be willing to play. It's used different arguments.
It should have been anticipated.
Different arguments at different times. It's used procedural arguments. When that hasn't worked, it's tried to link it to the NPT, which is.
But obviously, they would use all the arguments. They don't want India in.
Yes.
Diplomats anticipate all this.
Of course. So to the extent that China can be the only country standing, which is what happened in 2008, the only country.
It is not China which will be the only country standing. Let's not forget Turkey.
We'll see. We'll see in the next 2 days. A lot can happen in the next 2 days, and a lot will happen in the next 2 days.
Australia, New Zealand.
Australia, in fact, has supported. New Zealand has expressed some concerns, but none of the countries have come out to the level of opposition.
When you say this would severely set back relations with India, ultimately what you're saying is that China has to see that it has its relationship with India has to be above all its other concerns. Do you think realistically that would happen?
The India-China relationship matters. There's now a very large amount of Chinese investment coming to India. China and India are supporting each other in various ways and cooperating in various ways. In fact, we will see a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi tomorrow in Tashkent. India is expected to be joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So this is a valuable relationship for China. And I think that needs to be stressed.
But they have to see it as valuable enough.
My former colleague Andrew Small, who is at the German Marshall Fund, who is a China expert, in fact wrote an article in The Wire just a few days ago, where he said a big difference between 2008 and 2015 is a lot of the factors that led to China backing off in 2008 are no longer qualified now. I mean, President Xi's China's a very different president, and in fact, the only thing that might persuade them is focusing on the costs of the relationship with
India. That's an important point. Ajay Kumar, last quick comments from everyone. Yes.
You know, look, Nidhi, one thing I want to just tell Mr. Rao, that the jingoism doesn't include patriotism and as a primary opposition party and love for India, we will continue to try to put these guys honest. The fact is, whether it's Myanmar, whether it's Nagaland Accord, whether it is Pakistan ambition, whether it's doing the Jappi in Pakistan, they've continuously compromised India's interest. And when you speak against them, they don't please equate the BJP government with India. We have India's interest, and that's why we will fight you when you make a mockery of the whole system. And the other issue is Prime Minister taking ambition and realism. Pakistan, UFA fallout. Look at the way he went from Afghanistan to Pakistan to hug Mr. Nawaz Sharif and the price we are paying. So the question again is, the foreign policy is a serious issue. It's not an event management. It is not Mr. Modi centric. Please keep India's interest.
Mr. Rao, I have a last
parting
question
shot on Nagaland Accord. Nobody's seen this accord, but there's been so much of hype.
Some other time. But Mr. Rao, my question to you is, did India misread the Chinese opposition? Did India misread how strong the Chinese opposition would be to this?
Not at all. I think the entire foreign policy establishment is aware of the position that different countries are likely to make. But the real leadership lies in being able to gain advantage of your present situation all over the world. Today, Prime Minister Modi enjoys tremendous goodwill in the among the international leadership, and this is best time for India. And also having negotiated a number of deals on nuclear energy with and having decided to buy certain reactors from the US, I think there is an international interest. Russia, France, US, UK, they all would want to actively engage with every country, including the Chinese, to get India's entry into the NSG.
Well, I think
certainly this is the best time and best chance ever.
No, ultimately, it will depend on China, Pakistan,
No,
China.
I think China would only lose credibility by trying to equate Pakistan with India.
Well, the Chinese are doing it, sir, every single day. That's the problem.
But I just want to say, I don't think it's
May I have a word?
One shouldn't needlessly politicize this issue. In many ways,
everything in India is needlessly
of course,
politicized.
but the fact is that a lot of the steps being taken seem to be continuations of what the UPA government was doing. It's taken on slightly different shapes and forms, but it is somewhat distressing to see that a Congress Party spokesperson doesn't seem to be aware of the very real accomplishments of the UPA government.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. This is going to be a subject we'll be focusing closely on over the next couple of days. Some very high-wire diplomacy that will be going on in Seoul and certainly in Tashkent as well when the Prime Minister meets the Chinese President tomorrow. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Do join us then.
Left, Right and Center, presented by Amity University, a leading research and innovation-driven university. Powered by 99acres.com, India's #1 property portal.